5 minutes past the hour. We have, I think, 9 people, which is a good turnout. 10, okay, welcome. So right now I guess we just finished waiting. The agenda is in the chat if you're curious to see what's going to happen. So we are now 5 minutes past the hour. We will now start. Let's see here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming to today's workshop, writing out text for scientific diagrams with the scientific Python community. I'll go through the agenda and then hand it off to my co-host, Isabella. A very quick introduction, I'm Mars Lee. I work at Quantsci and I contribute to NumPy. A quick visual description for my visually impaired folks. I'm an Asian woman with undercut white hair, octagonal glasses, and a very colorful, like 90s style windbreaker. So the agenda, we are currently in the second part. We're going to learn how to write out text and contribute. I'll also be quickly explaining SPEC, or the Scientific Python Ecosystem Coordination, because this workshop started because a SPEC maintainers requested it, but since we've opened it to the public and shared it to social media, I don't want to make any assumptions of who knows what. So you might recognize some of these very powerful Python libraries used in science, math, computing, and a lot of other cool things. The Scientific Python Ecosystem Coordination, or SPEC, aims to bring together all these different communities and share solutions so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We are currently writing like some guidelines and like sharing what we've learned. In this workshop, we'll be adding out text to the SPEC blog. And as you can see, it's open for submissions and has a variety of posts. There are a lot of really cool posts, such as from Google Summer of Code and tutorials, but there's a lot of images without alt text. So these cool images are not fully conveyed to the visually disabled. But I'll let Isabella take over for now to explain more about alt text and how to write it.
Thanks. We're going to do the screen share switcheroo. So give me a moment. And wow, can someone confirm full screen slides? Thank you. Nods, thumbs up. Fantastic. What a responsive group. I really appreciate that. Let's move that. Cool. So yes, this is now my slides that look totally different. Have fun. I'm calling it Intro to Image Descriptions. I've got a short time frame because we want to make sure you have plenty of time to write. So I am going to go quickly. Please interrupt me if you have questions or hold them till the end. I think we'll have plenty of time to discuss, but just wanted to invite that. And here we go. Before we go any further, I try and do my usual reminders at an event, right? Scientific Python event. They have a code of conduct. We're all liable to that code of conduct. That includes me, if there's ever a problem at any point. Also, please correct me if I mispronounce your name. I do these events a lot and I mess up all the time and people sometimes don't tell me till after. I'd like to say your name right, so let me know if I screw up. Cool. Let's start the show as my secret slide to remind me to introduce myself because I've given so many talks where I never do. My name is Isabella. By title, I am a designer of some kind. I like working in a lot of projects in this ecosystem, so I'm excited to be here today. My less cool image description than Mars will be that I just have really poofy hair because I always think it looks like someone dropped a very fluffy dog on my head, and I find that to be a funny image. Cool. So Mars talked a little bit about what we're doing here, but what is accessibility? Trying to make sure we're on the same page. When I'm saying accessibility during this talk, I'm specifically saying building things so that disabled people can perceive and operate them. I know it's used a lot of different ways, so I like to start there. And there are also a lot of different things that are covered in the umbrella of accessibility with this definition. But we're really going to be talking about image descriptions today, right? So that's just one of many things. The internet has images. And what happens when you can't access them for various reasons, right? So say I was like, oh, look at my slides. All the information you need is here. And this is what you get, this nice little broken image. And if you're using anything to try and describe it to you, like any assistive tech, it might say image.png, which tells you nothing. That's not helpful at all, right? So there are multiple reasons to this could happen. Like say, maybe you just can't see the image. Maybe your internet connection is really bad right now and you're just seeing blurry pixels from the screen share anyway. So there's a lot of different people that this can benefit. I also want to point out, like, not having descriptions is a really common problem. The WebAIM Million, which is a kind of review of the top 1,000,000 most visited web pages for like common accessibility failures, actually lists it as the second most common failure. I found this really surprising. I figured that more people were writing some kind of description. So this is an awesome skill that you can take elsewhere too. But wait, I talked a bunch of things. What is an image description in the first place? So that's saying, like, I have an image at the bottom of the screen, and if for some reason you can't access it, it would tell you that this is the scientific Python logo and not, in this case, I know it's logo.png because I put it in here. So it's having a description that actually responds to what's happening. I'm going to check the chat real quick because I've seen a few and I want to make sure there's no questions. No, okay, cool. Wonderful. And most of all, I would say, though, with these images, it's all about context. The same images can be used in different contexts and have really different meaning, right? I think we've probably all encountered that on the internet at some point. So I'm going to break down a few different categories because I find this helps people figure out like what we should be writing when we're interacting with these. So W3C likes to break image descriptions or image purposes up to informative, functional, complex, and decorative. I love this system. It has yet to fail me. Let me know if you ever can't classify one of these. I'd be fascinated. So for some examples, we're going to be working with this bird from the first slide. So in some cases, right, we have informative images, meaning it's providing some kind of extra information. So pretend I'm writing a blog post because I want to talk about popular subjects in art history. So I've written a paragraph that says some animals are popular artistic subjects. Here are some examples. And I just leave a picture of a bird. In this case, it would be reasonable to just say birds, right? Because it fills out the sentence. But if we're working in a different situation, oh no, that's backwards, sorry. Oh boy, I can't use my keyboard. If we're working, right, let's say now we're going to try and use this bird in a different context. We're on the Scientific Python blog. We scroll down to the footer and we find, wait, what's that? I thought that was supposed to be the Twitter logo. And then we remember they're going through their whole rebrand and stuff. And this is the new Twitter logo now. So it looks almost the same as the last thing we did, but in this case, it wouldn't really make sense to describe it as a bird, right? Because this image is actually a link to Twitter. So it would make sense to say, this will take you right to Scientific Python on Twitter in this case, because that's a part of their rebrand too. For complex images, this is always a fun one. I think this is a lot of what we're going to be running into today, because complex is just saying that there is a large amount of information in this image that we need to make sure is represented. So in this case, because there's so many things going on, I want to give you a few pointers first. So, right, you want to describe kind of from general to specific. Think like, you know, you are explaining this to someone. So you kind of want to get the layout before you get into the details. Make sure to describe things like any kind of titles, any kind of axes, if that's relevant for what you're working with. You also want to describe kind of key information or trends. This is especially important if you're relying on that image to explain something for you. Like a lot of time people will say like, oh, just check out, you know, this graph and it'll tell you what's happening here. Make sure, like, if that's how you're using it, to include that. Oh, and if there's any text in images like there is in this one, you need to make sure that that text is included elsewhere. It could be repeated elsewhere in a paragraph. It could be in the image description itself. And in some cases, you may want to link to a longer description. There are times when there's a lot of data and it may be too much versus like skimming the image if you're reading the whole thing versus I want to go investigate it. So we'll talk about that a little more later if it comes up. In this case, this is my long example. Oh gosh, I have to move the Zoom things. One moment. Cool. So I would describe this, right? Admiration of a bird, a fake chart showing the relationship between dynamism and sheer power for a given bird. Dynamism is at a 10 on the x-axis and sheer power is at a 9,000 on the y-axis. The chart is also annotated with the key question, what is the airspeed velocity of this unladen drawing? So, yep. we also, the final section, right, was decorative. So we're back on the Scientific Python blog, but the birds have taken over. These birds they flew everywhere and they have no meaning. They have no relationship with the surrounding content, right? So in this case, because they aren't really adding anything, we don't really want them here, that sort of thing. There is actually an option to leave this image description empty. Empty alt tags do still need the alt tag, just to be clear. Like you can't just not have it because then it will try and read the image name again. But that is totally an option. You just want to be careful with this because we don't want to decide that someone doesn't have access to, say, like the fun stuff or maybe, you know, like the enjoyable. So it can be a fine line, but it is always an option I like to bring up because it's easy to forget when you start working. Cool. Finally, outside of what's in the alt text, you do still want to style it like you would any other piece of writing, right? This is still text, so we're looking for correct spelling. If, you know, I sometimes write things in a place with a spell check instead of just directly in GitHub if I'm uncertain. We want punctuation, sentence case capitalization like this, where the first letter is capitalized. And if there's ever a case where you have like repeated elements on the same page, it's really nice if you can name them consistently so that, you know, it's not like you're reading through and you get like in one place, oh, you know, this is the edit icon and this is the pencil icon. That can be confusing if you don't have the other images. And once again, all of what I said applies to any images. We're going to be right on the blog today, but you can take this knowledge with you. This is a common issue. Please like start describing images wherever you can. And I think that is it. Yep. So for today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be updating or adding image descriptions to Scientific Python blog posts. Mars will get into the how in just a moment. And right, we want to get you involved. Please ask questions. This is one of my favorite like exercises to do with people. It's a lot of fun usually. And there we go. I'm going to link the notes. That's for me. So thank you so much. Do we have questions before I completely switch it over though? Cool. Correct. Great. Go Mars.
Yeah, now I'm taking it back over to me. Welcome back to the Mars channel. Okay, I will share my screen here. Okay, so I will be going through how to actually, you know, nitty gritty, how to contribute and implement all that you just learned. So we'll be getting to the writing very soon. So the first step, and by the way, all these steps are in the agenda. The first step is go to the working PR. The link, like I said, is in the chat. You will see this list, and there is actually 63 images. In fact, the repository for the blogs has about 240, which is a lot, but we just have a fine selection for us here today. I don't expect us to finish all 63, but I think it shows that there's a lot of valuable resources about Python and data science that are not as accessible as they should be. And thankfully, we are here to correct that. So you can click around, and if you click on, say, line 165 of this document, it will lead you straight to the section where you can add the alt text. You can also see the rendered version, like the blog post with the image, to get the full context. You don't need to be a domain expert or know everything about the specific details. Today we have a lot about Matplotlib, but you can gain a lot just through like reading, skimming through the blog, and getting the context. And, you know, having some alt text is better than no alt text. So third step, comment, call dibs, it's yours, nothing is assigned. You can also work together in teams. And you'll be writing your alt text as a GitHub suggestion. So you just click on that button over there, and then you pop up, and then you just replace the alt text over there. And again, always useful to look at the full blog post for context. Since the GitHub changes show only a very small fraction of the post. You can also refer to resources, and we have linked W3, the Diagram Center. And for example, with the Diagram Center, they kind of give you the details, like Isabella said, some of them like the axes, text, general patterns. But if you're looking for very specific ones, like the scatter plot, there are resources in the Diagram Center. And then last step, submit and repeat. You can also refer to the checklist in the agenda for formatting, editing, or to try again, or to give feedback to other people. And ask questions. We have 30 to 40 minutes of working time, so use that time to write, ask questions. We have people who like to listen, some prefer to talk, whatever works for you. And you see there's a lot of different images, and these actually all did come from the spec blog. That's because documentation has, more than just graphs of what happened. There could be screenshots of interfaces, animations, memes, a rabbit that without context looks a bit strange. That's why it's always good to look at context. So yes, now we are ready to start. So we should put the PR link in the chat. I will be keeping time and giving occasional reminders.
Can I check? I threw a question in the chat. Do people want to see that kind of suggestion workflow in GitHub, or are you all familiar with it? Okay, well, you can change your mind.
Yeah, I assume that people had a familiarity of working with GitHub, but if in case you don't or someone else doesn't, there are the step-by-step, more detailed breakdown in the agenda.
Awesome. So we're going to go to the PR, and something I'd also recommend, I think you'll see in Mars's example, she sometimes like shows a claim, like it'll say, I'll work on this, because you can all add multiple suggestions to the same image, but it's awesome if we're able to branch out and cover more. You will need to keep reloading the page because GitHub suggestions isn't actually meant for real-time collaboration like this. So if you want to make sure someone hasn't done something, remember to reload the page. Cool. I'm gonna choose one then. So what I do a lot of the time is I have the PR open in one tab and the blog open in the other so that I can see all the context, because the diff doesn't usually give me a lot of paragraphs on either side to figure out what someone's talking about. So
So people are already calling divs. Oh, people are already writing.
This
is there a link to the blog and the PR somewhere?
I don't know, but here's a link to the blog anyway.
I link to the rendered version of the page. So in the post, there is the file and then the rendered version. So you could get to the full blog that way.
Great, thanks.
Oh, also learning from our past events, if you use GitHub's in the diff, it will be like, oh, show like this rendered, and you start typing and switch between those views, it will delete your work. So don't rely on that if you haven't had that unfortunate experience before. Because Mars and I are always waiting for questions. You may not see that much from us, but also I gotta say, I think this is the quietest group we've had. Look at you all, you're so focused. I'm really impressed.
And not to mention, I think I already took like the funnest one, which is like the meme with Bernie Sanders. Thank you once again. Thank you for reading.
I don't know, memes can be tricky. That's sometimes hard.
That's true. Thankfully, this one isn't too complicated.
So I know when I was looking through the blog, I saw a lot of visualizations of some kind of data, which makes total sense for this community. But one thing I would say, like I gave an example with like axes and a title, and I didn't see a lot of that. So I'm super curious to see how y'all are describing this work, just because I love to see what people do, since I'm like a degree away from sometimes your work as a designer, right? I'm not using Matplotlib, for example, on my day-to-day. So you have some really cool images on this blog.
Yeah, so I'm about to tackle one of those. I'm looking at the postdoc one, and it's definitely a full informative graph. So be curious to see what you think when I get done.
Yeah, you can also ask like questions during if you need the focus, that's fine. But
Yeah, I haven't got very far yet, so but I'll have maybe more in a little bit.
Can I ask a more broader question about alt text in scientific documentation, not necessarily specific to this PR?
Please.
I'm interested in kind of the tooling around writing documentation for open source software and how to get alt text from like the source code documentation files all the way through to the rendered HTML output. And there's a lot of pieces along the way there. For example, if I wanted to just to give kind of the most complex example that I've run into so far, if I want to specify alt text for a matplotlib image stored in a Jupyter notebook that gets converted into Sphinx source code, that then it gets eventually transformed into HTML. I guess my question is, it seems like there needs to be coordination across several different projects, all of the different stages in this documentation build process. And I wondered if there's some kind of organization or existing effort along those lines, that coordination.
I could be misunderstanding, but I believe Melissa, actually, we did some work with this on a similar case on a different project. I can link you to that, but she might have more answers. In that case, it was allowing, like, letting the thing that's creating that screenshot from the notebook accept an alt text argument, but she knows more than I do there. I will link that one moment.
Yeah, so just to, in that specific case, we were using a dedicated function that took screenshots. So this is a Qt application. So it took screenshots from the application, and we managed to include an alt text argument to that screenshot so that when it was rendered in the notebook, it already had a screenshot. But if you're doing, so if you have static images that you're adding to a Jupyter notebook, there's ways to include alt text, either by using the markdown alt text syntax or by using HTML tags. Usually you can do that inside a Jupyter notebook. So if you're using mist NB or you're using JupyText to convert your notebook from markdown to IPython notebooks, that's a possibility. For generated images, yes, that is harder. So for example, if you have a matplotlib plot, I don't really know how. What we proposed in the beginning was to use a caption instead of an alt text. So at least you have a description for the image next to the image, even if the image itself doesn't have alt text. So this is a workaround, and it's not a complete solution, but it's something you can try. Does that help you in any way?
Yeah, it does. Having just a caption is a good idea, and I'm a little surprised that I didn't think of that already. Is there a way to, this is very in the weeds, is there a way to sort of specify that this is an image caption instead of just generic text that happens to be next to an image?
I believe, depending what you're doing, I mean, there is like sometimes a figure caption tag, right? Depending what you're working in, I believe that some have that though. Other than that, yeah, I know there's been some discussion about generating alt text as like by default, or like prompting people to put it in Pamphile. But yeah, so one thing that people actually do often, I didn't mention with that kind of decorative image status where you're leaving that description blank, is they will like have the information around it. So that's also one case, because if you leave it blank, anything like any assistive tech will skip it, basically, is why you would want to do that. So that's one situation I've seen on documentation with complex images. Particularly, like I see this on guidelines with like large interface screenshots. And so they'll actually leave it blank because all the description will be in the caption below it. So it just jumps directly to the caption. That, though, may not be entirely possible if you're right, you don't have that alt tag in the first place.
Gotcha. Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
I can also share my, yeah, and you can ask more, but I also want to share my screen real quick for Saranjit. Let me show you where that is. I saw you ask that. Okay, where am I? Not here, not here. Also, if you want to continue this conversation somewhere else, we've definitely had multiple people ask this. I'm trying to like gather people who are interested because I think this should be something that libraries probably have some kind of option for people to enable if they want. Okay. For Saranjit, you should be seeing the PR I have here. So what you're going to do, I'm not going to actually make this comment. So if you hover, right, I'm thinking you made it this far, but just in case you hover, you get the plus for handling this. The suggestion button is right here. It's not super visible, and the syntax is not necessarily memorable either. So that's where it is. I usually do add a single comment instead of start a review, because if you click start a review, then you need to submit the review for any of your comments to appear. But did that help? I'll check the chat. Yes, thank you so much for asking. I've known a lot of people that use GitHub all the time and don't use suggestions, so I've learned it's not actually. Yeah, cool. And I'm okay. Yeah, sorry. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, is there a way of testing this? In the sense that, like, we can go right in the alt text, but I mean, it's a subjective question, but how do you test it? Like that, like, is it just supposed to be like English?
Can I ask, when you mean test, do you mean like some kind of formal automated test, or do you mean how are we like reviewing that we want to accept this description?
I think it's more towards the line that someone who is going to use it, does this make sense to them?
Right. In terms of the language, yes, ideally we would have these things in other languages. So far, we have not made it to that point, just to be honest. Like, you're right. I think that the ideal world, when I've read more about localization efforts, is to have these translatable. We haven't personally made it that far. I haven't run into anyone who's been working on that either. If you have, please tell me. That would be awesome. But yeah, in terms of testing, I don't have like a bank of people, for example, that do it. Sometimes what I do, just to be honest with you, is I will like ask someone who has no context for whatever I'm writing it for. A lot of the times that's my mom. If I'm really unsure, I'll be like, hey mom, can you read the plain text version of this, right? Don't give it to them with the rendered image. And if they say, what's happening? Or like, oh, they mentioned this thing, that then I didn't get that info. Sometimes that's the easiest way. You can also read it yourself in plain text. That's my personal favorite, or breaking the image link in some way, like just mess it up. But actually being certain that it's making sense to people can be, right, tricky. Different people are going to need different things. But yeah.
I think there was a very cool discussion in the chat about diagrams. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that, just because it's important.
Are you talking about the one about flowcharts?
Yes. If nobody wants to ask, I'll ask.
Yeah, I can also pull up an example that I did previously for the Jupyter documentation, where it was a contributor workflow. So it was something valuable, but it had a lot going on. Isabella, do you have a link to the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I can get you a link for the Jupyter one.
Yeah, because that one is where I shown the short and the long version.
I can, oh wait, no, I can't add the image actually, Mars. I was gonna say, if you want to talk about the flowchart, I can add it, but I don't have permission.
Okay, I could talk about the flowchart because this is an example of the more complex things that people will encounter and will talk about and try to do, but we don't cover in our like quick introduction. So I can share my screen and talk about what I've written and my experience with that. Okay, So this one is for a contributor flowchart, which I mentioned is very useful, but it has things going forward, backwards, things that loop around, and there is eventually an end, but there are several boxes. So, you know, you could, this is a, this kind of goes into what we call short out text and long out text. So there are situations where maybe someone only wants a short out text because they're like essentially skimming the information. But there's other times that someone might want to have that information in depth, like as if you would read this fully to understand all parts of it. So what I've done is for the short out text, it basically just provides like a very basic description of what that is. And it tells that you can refer to the link that gives the full long out text. So I have hosted separately the full long out text, but you can get the idea of like putting in the levels and then including the nesting. So you could start at the first level, move forward, but sometimes like at this point, you might be moving a different way. You might be going like laterally, you might be going backwards. So the full long version here, can everyone see that? I think I'm sharing.
I'm seeing plain text for sure.
So this is the full long version. It includes all the information like forward, like run the test suite, verified update code works appropriately. So nested options is forward to passes, towards to fail, and then right for fail, and a right for pass. And this, I mentioned, if anyone else is curious about taking on this higher level challenge, there are resources, as I mentioned, the Diagram Center, and this is one that I've linked in the chat as well. So you can see different levels, some nesting, backwards, lateral, forwards. Yeah, so I think that this is an example of like how alt text is really valuable, but also can be really tricky because, you know, that's the whole thing about images, providing so much information worth 1,000 words. Now we're trying to distill it back into words, but also being concise and appropriate to the situation.
I think something we probably didn't say yet also that's good is like many things, there's not like one correct way to do this. We're just trying to make sure things don't get lost essentially. But in seeing people write these, you often like people have different stylistic takes. What they think matters can sometimes differ. It's really interesting for sure. I think there are a few wrong things though. Actually, I didn't bring it up because I was trying to give y'all plenty of times to work, but right, an example would be like people don't generally want to hear like things start with an image of or a screenshot of, because that's already known when they're entering it. What else would be really wrong? Something I've seen now that more social media sites are starting to support alt text, which is fantastic, is people using it as like another place to vague tweet essentially. That's semi-hidden, and we do want to make sure to get the info too. So yeah.
So Noah's put a one of her alt text. I think we could look at that later towards the end because we do have time scheduled to go through some of these, but I think it is a good, it looks good so far.
So I would just say that in that blog post, there are 3 images, but only 2 of them had a place to add a tag. So I don't know.
Yeah,
if you want me to go and add one. Or if you already added it.
I don't have it right. I think I could do it after the
Okay.
workshop.
Cool.
I actually did see it, but I didn't. I guess I guess I could explain a bit to explain my reasoning was like there are 240 images in the blog, and I was just trying to see the ones that were not too complicated and either didn't have alt text or not very good alt text. So for the one that you mentioned about the one that's missing, I think the alt text says blank example. And I felt like that is enough because anything else would be saying like it is beige rectangle, which isn't really necessary in this situation. But I mean, could be nice in like if this was more like a visual arts focused. I mean, it could be nice flavored text, you know, a little some fun and surprise alt text. We could have fun with alt text as well. But thank you for pointing that out, and I'll see if I'm able to do that after this workshop.
Jared, are you asking for suggestions for that one in general, or is there something you've started there? Ooh, that's a good one.
I can speak on that briefly because I also saw the one. So I'm talking about the one Maxwell Grover linked, and that is in the blog post Matplotlib and data-driven SEO. And that is the header image. And I feel like as a header image, it provides more of an overview of what the blog post is about, and we don't necessarily need to go into detail of what each is, because if you click on the link, it's actually a combination of like 4 very different graphs. So if I were to take a stab at it, I would think like 4 different graphs representing different ways search engine optimization can be utilized. There is a line graph, pie graph, bar graph, and then the last one, like, so that way we have like a high level overview, but provide a bit more detail. Okay, that's what a collection of visualization based on optimization. Yeah, like something like that.
Yeah, because it's hard because you don't necessarily want to go too much in detail and stuff like that. Plus, it's hard to pick up some of the context and all those specific charts. So
yeah, and in the blog post there are 2 other images, and they go into some of the graphs that they put in the header image. So in that case, like that one graph, that's where it's relevant and appropriate to go into more detail.
That was a great one for the context example, right? Because like since Mars started with that being a header image, that totally changes. It would be written.
These are really good questions, and I have been putting them down in the meeting agenda under the question section. Part of that is these are like exactly part of the reason we host these workshops is to get like people's questions as they write this alt text, because Isabella and I are in the process of writing these guidelines for writing alt text that are specific to the needs of scientific Python and documentation. And, you know, the ones about what if it's in a Jupyter notebook or has like these extra layers in between from what you start and the HTML end result, or, you know, with complex images, sometimes they're used as headers, sometimes they're used as jokes, sometimes they're used for something that's very in-depth. So these are all like really great things people have brought up, and we are taking note of that. It is 50 minutes, so we have about 10 minutes until the official end of the meeting. So according to the agenda, this is where we might be reviewing some of the alt text written and closing up. But you know, if you want to keep writing, you could do that. I know that some of you asked for specific reviews, so I know earlier earlier there was a request to look at a flow chart. I think that was from Noah. So I think in this case, I will look for the comment and share my screen so we could all like look at the graph and the written out text. So give me a moment.
Thanks for being here, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa. So I just finished one description. If anyone is interested in looking at it, give me some feedback. I'd be very appreciative. It is the first plot for the matplotlib to advocate for postdoc salary, I guess.
I'm a looking.
Yeah, and I'll just do the same after I get feedback for the second one for that. So I'll finish that one up.
Ooh, yeah. Oh God, like I just love doing these so much. Sorry, Mars, you can get to it if you're ready now.
You could review Jared's, and I'll go through Noah because Noah did ask first. I think that's the only one we'll have time for to really go review, but I'll see what we can do because I do want to have time for closing as well. So let's see here. Okay, so we have the example from Noah. As you can see, it's a flow chart, but thankfully nothing too complicated and very relatable. So Noah has made wrote some out text here, a joke flow chart. The top level goes from left to right, and then both left and right edges lead to the bottom level. The top level is 1, my roommate is Philistine and a boar. 2, my roommate ate the last of the cold cereal. 3, I'm really hungry. The bottom level is I'm annoyed at my roommate. So looking at this, there are levels 1, 2, 3, and it does explain the flow of things. So I would say based off looking at it right now, I would say it's good. And I do like how the out text, it starts with saying a joke flow chart. I guess just to give context, like this is not a super serious example, because I think that is a bit of comedy, is like expectation, punchline, timing. So it's like sharing the fun parts of these images with people who use alt text, which is cool as well. So I would say that's a good little piece of alt text. Quickly scrolling through the rest, I see that we've done a lot, at least 20, which is real good. So yes, unfortunately, I don't have time to go through more right now, but I'll explain a bit more in closing what is going to happen next. Hopefully, okay. Sorry, give me a minute. Is the slide showing?
Yeah, we're just seeing the presenter view too.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so closing. So, okay, so this is the end of the official time slot. So let's end off with a bang. So congratulations, you've been successfully initiated into the alt text task force. You have been trained to have a very valuable skill set for writing alt text for documentation. Now you can go forth in this workshop and beyond to better the world with your newfound skills. So, you know, you could be cool like us. You could join the cool party. So this is recorded, and if you would like to refer to it in the future, it will be on the Scientific Python YouTube channel. There is also an optional group photo. So this will be for the blog post where we'll be summarizing what we did and some of the really good questions and discussions that we had here. So turning on your camera for a photo is totally optional. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I think it'll be nice to like have our own little image here. Let me see how I can do that. So thank you for being part of that photo. Just to quickly summarize and like put things in a bit more perspective, this is really just the beginning. And this workshop is focused only on one part of accessibility, which is alt text, which is for visual disabilities. But you know, there's a lot more different areas for cognitive accessibility. And the more contributors we have in different accessibility efforts, the better. The scientific Python ecosystem has a long way to be more accessible, but I think that is why we have to do it together and think of this as like a long-term community roadmap. And I think it's really valuable to create a cultural change where more people with disabilities are in data science using Python and able to access the same tools and powers that we all have here. So we are really at the very beginning, but I know that with enough time and more contributors, we'll be able to get to that point at the end. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you everyone for writing, contributing, talking. The working PR will still be open for about a week if you still want to write anything else. I'll be around. I think Isabella will be around as well past the next hour if anyone wants to talk. But if you want to end the call, you're also feel free to do so. Thank you and bye.